Three, two, one. Here we are, guys. This is the Tales from the Road podcast series. This is podcast number 2. The plan is to do these podcasts every week. I think Thursday is going to be the day. Typically, we're going to do these 10 p.m., 11 p.m., 12 p.m. Let's call it Kyrgyzstan time. That's where I am now. That's going to be the morning for the United States, and it's going to be midday for Europe. So very excited to continue with this podcast series. I've got lots of different things to talk about, and I am now in Kyrgyzstan. Very excited to be here. I've got my Albania t-shirt on. Had a very nice time in the Balkans. Got here to Kyrgyzstan like 3 days ago, so I'm still kind of getting adjusted, trying to get the content out, trying to finish my last videos about Macedonia, and then you guys will see what life is like here in Kyrgyzstan. So lots of stuff coming, very excited about it, and very stoked to be here. So thank you guys for participating and watching last time. I'm sorry I didn't interact in the comments and didn't interact in the chat. Still new to this live feature on YouTube, so I'm trying to figure out how to do that while I am not losing my stream of thought. So we will try our best to interact with you guys. If you have comments, if you have different things going on that you want to let me know during the live stream, definitely go in the chat. I will be responding this time. I will make sure I figure out how this works before we get into the content. So all that being equal, thank you guys for watching. If you've made it this far, if you've watched the first podcast, thank you guys for watching. And without any more to say, I think we're going to get into today's topic, which is common misconceptions that foreigners have about Americans. So I'm an American. I'm from New Mexico. That is a state, for those of you that are abroad, next to Texas, next to Arizona, south of Colorado, north of Mexico. I've lived abroad now for almost 5 years. And it's been quite the journey. I've lived in a few US states, California, Oregon. I'm pretty much like a West Coast guy. But going abroad, I think, is the only way to really understand, in a weird way, what it means to be American. I think going from state to state, I think you understand a little bit more the differences that you find between the states. So when I moved up to Oregon for university, I learned a lot about my kind of New Mexicanness. I think you don't really understand what makes you so much like from that place until you meet people who have never been there or don't understand the culture or just don't even know where it is, to be honest. A lot of people don't have a context for New Mexico, which kind of made my experience living in different places in the United States interesting, because most people have never been there. They've never met anyone who's been there. And it's not a very common place people visit. For my friends from California or from New York or from Chicago or from Florida, these are really common places people go, especially domestic Americans. So I think people are a little bit less confused what your culture is like. New Mexico is very, very interesting. And I'd love to do a podcast just about New Mexico. So I'm not going to get too into it, but people don't really get where I come from, or people don't really understand what it means to be New Mexican when I say to them that I'm New Mexican. So the internal feelings towards New Mexico, even in the United States, is very specific. That being said, so going abroad and being New Mexican and also American, it's kind of funny. Being American abroad comes with baggage. The United States is one of the most notorious countries in the world. It's a country that everyone knows about, everyone has seen something about, and I think most importantly, everyone has an opinion about. So I think it's different that if you're traveling abroad and you're like from Guatemala or you're from Cambodia or you're from the Central African Republic. I think while I love those countries, and I think every country is unique and interesting, I think a lot of people don't nearly associate as much both positives and negatives with these smaller countries that are less consequential in the world that we live in than they do with the United States. I think, for example, if you're a traveler, probably the United States, Russia, and China, maybe India, would be the most significant. Of course, they're the biggest countries in the world, but they'd be the most significant kind of background that people would stereotype and have opinions about either way. Coming from the United States, of course, the entire world consumes American media. So everyone seems to have some type of opinion on the United States, good, bad, ugly. And it's funny, kind of the dichotomy between people from Western Europe, from Eastern Europe, from Asia, from South America, the way that they view Americans, because of course, they're going to have different opinions based on, was there a war with the United States? Do they have family in the United States? What has the United States done in their country? Has there been anything done by the United States near a country near them? Do they know anybody who lives there? I mean, the list goes on. So I'll give you a little kind of funny story that just happened to me in Kyrgyzstan. It's always funny when you travel with the American passport. It's one of the best passports to have, certainly. And so I flew into Bishkek. I'm in a city called Bishkek, also called Fruze, during the shout out to the Albanian flag. Thank you for watching, Adian. Fruze was the old name of Bishkek under the Soviet Union. Flew in, and it's interesting coming to these countries that are either were post-Soviet or communist. There's a lot of propagandization that happens in the United States in schooling that I think we don't necessarily realize or know that it's happening, but it leaves an impression. I remember my first time in Russia when I saw Cyrillic, I was like, "Ooh," not scared, but just a little skeptical, because the only context that we, I think, hear about Russia is kind of in the Cold War context, and it's always negative. So when you come to these countries and you cross the borders, there's always this kind of a little bit of a fear. Maybe they won't like Americans. Maybe they'll be rude. Maybe they won't let me across the border. Maybe there's something wrong with my visa. I don't know what it is. But these kind of biases have definitely been put into us through our textbooks in school, through these various ways that we learn, through media, this happens in many countries. It's not anything out of the ordinary. So Kyrgyzstan, it's a socialist state. People wear these really big Soviet kind of hats, and the guards are big and they look kind of terrifying. I get to the border, and I go up with my American passport, and I give, I was always sliding the American passport. You're not sure what kind of reaction you're going to get from border guards. It really depends on the country. And the guy says, "America," and I say, "Yeah, America," and he goes, "America, welcome Kyrgyzstan." And I was like, wow, that's so nice. It's an interesting thing that I'll talk about more, but people from countries that are typically poorer, typically less connected, typically have less access to certain resources, less access to education and other services. These countries all really like America. I think the American dream is something that's been propagandized around the world, for better or for worse. It's something that people know about. And also, a lot of people from these countries, could be the Balkans, could be Eastern Europe, could be Central Asia, could be Vietnam, have family for some sort of reason that live in the United States. So a lot of these people have connections, or they want to move there. Kyrgyz people are probably a lot less interested, for example, in the European Union. Just for whatever reason, they'd probably be more interested in going to the United States. So when I go across borders, funny border situations. When I was in Ukraine as well, people saw my American passport and were very positive, almost kind of goofy. And versus like when I go to Germany, it's all business in Germany. It doesn't matter where you're from. You give them the American passport, you get a deadpan stare looking at you. It's kind of, it's always the Germans are super intimidating on the border. I don't know if you guys have ever crossed the border into Germany, but they don't mess around. Same thing in Belgium. So I think the border situation for Americans is always interesting. It's always, I think there's a lot of perception of what could happen at the border versus what actually does. So I've never had a bad border experience. The worst border experiences I've had have actually been coming back into the United States, because they often interview me because I don't spend a lot of time in the US these days, and they want to know where I am, what I've been doing, yada, yada, yada. So fair. All right, well, let's get to the misconceptions. I've rambled on enough about being American from the internal and from the border. So let's talk about the first things that I always get. So I interact with people from around the world all the time. pretty much every day. It's funny when you interact with people who have traveled quite a bit versus people who haven't traveled quite a bit. So the people who haven't traveled quite a bit are kind of funny because they ask you questions that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So what I used to do is I would try to explain to people that I was from New Mexico, regardless of if they had been to the United States or not. And that was my first faux pas. You shouldn't do that. The thing is that most Americans know where New Mexico is, but even if you've been to the United States, you might, as a foreigner, you're probably not going to know where it is. And so now I'm kind of on the fence about, do I tell people I'm from Texas or do I tell people I'm from California? Those are two very different balls of waxes. Can you say that? Ball of wax? It's a different ball of wax. Texas people have this kind of Americana, steak, barbecue, guns, cowboys kind of thing. And California has the surfer culture, LA, Hollywood. And these are the two main things that people know from the United States besides New York City. So if you're trying to explain to someone from Kyrgyzstan who maybe has never been to the United States, never interacted with someone from the United States, never met anyone from the United States, you can pick which American do you want to be. Do you want to be the rootin' tootin' cowboy? Do you want to be the kind of, upper class, swanky Californian? Do you want to be the big city New Yorker? You can really tell anybody, anyone, because the thing is, if they don't know, if they don't know 100 cities in the United States, maybe they only know 5, they're not going to certainly know yours unless you're from Los Angeles or New York City. So, I will say, I will ask you, how many cities do you guys know in Russia? Probably not a lot. So the thing is, like, when you meet a Russian person, you say, are you from Moscow? They can say, yes, I'm from Moscow, which, there's 20 million people in Moscow. The chance is kind of high. But you could also just say, yeah, I'm from Moscow, even though they're from a suburb of Moscow or they're from Siberia. It's just easier to just say I'm from Moscow, just for the sake of argument. So I think the funny part is, so foreigners typically, especially when you get into a taxi, you say if you're from America, they always tell you where their relatives are from or where they've been, or they just ask you blatantly, are you from Los Angeles? Or are you from New York City? Or I love Chicago. And then me as an American, I'm supposed to go, yeah, I love Chicago. I've never been to Chicago. I would love to go to Chicago. I have friends from Chicago, but the thing is, you want to make some sort of connection with these people. And it's really funny because they're going out on a limb. They're trying to extend the olive branch, per se. And it's nice that they're trying to interact. But, it's like, this is the same thing. Are you from Moscow? No, I'm from Yekaterinburg. And it's like, I don't know where Yekaterinburg is. So it's easier just to say, yeah, I love Chicago. Chicago's great. Or I love Los Angeles. It's a great city. Big city. That's kind of the first kind of thing you're going to have. So unless you're from a big city in the United States, no one's going to know where you're from. That's kind of the case in point. So these kind of misconceptions about America, I think they really go with what region of the world you're in. So I noticed the kind of preconceived notions of the United States is completely different in Asia than what it is in Europe. And in the Balkan countries, it's very different than what it is in Western Europe. So a lot of this has to do, of course, with, with what wars have happened, with how people's families are affected, with if people's families emigrated to the United States at some point. But also there's just this kind of culture war between Western Europe and the United States. Western Europeans, when they hear you're American, are a lot less enchanted by it. My friends from France or from Spain or from Italy, they say, are you from America? You're from America? It's like, yeah, they go, nice. There's a lot of baggage with that head nod. And it's kind of funny. Versus when I was in Vietnam, which was so interesting because, for example, the Vietnamese have no reason to like American people. They just have no reason. They shouldn't. On paper, they definitely shouldn't. And the Vietnamese, they look at me. They say, where are you from? I say, I'm from America. They say, America, wow, that's great. And it's really striking because I had spent a lot of time in Europe before I had gone to Asia. And that was not like a typical kind of response that I was used to getting. I was normally used to being like, yeah, I'm from the United States, but, I actually like live in Europe now. And, I'm not so typical American, because the stereotypes about Americans that Europeans often associate are kind of with the negative ones, especially with the gun violence or the violence in the United States in general, the overeating, the Americans being fat thing. So Europeans sometimes feel that they are more classy than Americans. Oh, I'm from Paris. I'm from London. You're from New Mexico. Where's that? It's kind of funny. It's this little culture war we have. And it's funny too, because Americans sometimes think they're better than Europeans, we threw off the shackles of the republics. We don't have a king. We don't want your king. funny stuff like that. So that being said, in Asia, is just completely different. People love Americans. Most Asians, especially, there's huge communities of Thai people, Vietnamese, Cambodians, Malaysians, Indonesians that live in the United States, that they have connection. And it seems like everyone has an uncle or a brother or a cousin or a friend that lives there. And it's really funny. Like, even when I was in Macedonia, I was in Kumanovo, Macedonia. I was shooting my video there, and there were these two guys sitting on the top of a hill, Dragan and Badis. If you guys are watching, yeah. So they were sitting on the top of a hill, and they wanted to talk to me, and they said, "You speak English?" I said, "Yeah, I'm American." They're like, "Oh wow, I lived in." Dragan's like, "Yeah, I used to live actually in Florida." I was like, "Oh, super weird." He's like, "Yeah, I have a bunch of friends who live in Florida," and the other guy's like, "I lived in Australia for a couple of years." It was just genuinely interesting. There's so many Balkan people who have friends, family, colleagues that all live in the United States. So there's this big connection, and it's a happy connection because life in the Balkans is hard. So moving to New York City, to the United States, that's a big deal. That's an opportunity. It's a different life versus, if you're living in Denmark, I mean, you can move from Copenhagen to New York, but your quality of life isn't going to change. And if anything, in New York, it might be more hectic and actually get worse than beautiful, highly technological Copenhagen. So I think that's kind of the first interesting thing. You don't really expect that it would depend on the people, but it really does. And each country has their own thing. So I was the secondary part is that poverty. Definitely, if your country is impoverished, or if your country has its internal issues, whether it's voting rights, whether it's political problems, corruption, the United States looks pretty good. I know people in the United States are incredibly unhappy with what's happening in our country right now, and I'm in that boat, not gonna lie. But yeah, for a lot of people who come from a place with, it's just hectic. You can't make a good salary. There's not a lot of opportunities. I mean, think about coming from Kyrgyzstan. The average person here makes less than $300 a month. It's just the chance that you could move to anywhere in the United States and you could pull in a salary of $3,000, $4,000 a month. I mean, unbelievable. It's just absolutely unbelievable for these people. So I understand why people want to, they say, "Wow, you're from the U.S. That's amazing. That's great news." But I think it's the grass is always greener kind of effect in this case, where Americans say, "Oh, it could be better somewhere else," or we have a lot of problems. But if you're from Honduras and you just can't get by, there's gang violence, you can't find jobs, whatever it is, it's like, the U.S. looks pretty good. So I think people are very positive when they meet Americans, especially from places that are poorer, and they also love interacting in English and love hearing about life in the America with the golden cars and the big buildings and all this stuff. Obviously, the reality on the ground, at least New Mexico doesn't look like that. It's much more different than they probably expect. But in comparison to the block housing districts of outer Bishkek, I think anywhere in the United States sounds good. I would love to go to the outer regions of Bishkek and explore their block housing regions, but it's an interesting thing. So, but people from, like, for example, Denmark, Sweden, United Kingdom, you say you're American, they go, "Okay." And it's just kind of, they just take it as it is. It's not some sort of like good badge of honor that some people from some countries kind of stick to the identity of being American. So now I'm going to transition into a little bit of the negatives and then into the positives of the American stereotype. Because the negatives, I think, are what sometimes we all assume being Americans, because sometimes you have an idea about what's kind of ugly about your country because you're like living there, right? But the positives are interesting, and it struck me because there's lots of different positives that I've gotten in various places that I didn't really think about, but apparently exist. So comment if you guys think this is interesting. For sure, thank you guys for sticking around. So let's get into the negatives. So first negative about being an American abroad is that everyone thinks you're rich. I don't know if, I mean, it sounds like, oh, that's positive. They think you're rich. But the thing is, like, if you're backpacking in Thailand and you have like $4,000 to your name, which for a Thai person would be a lot of money, but for an American, that's like chump change. It's kind of annoying that everybody is kind of like, you're rich, I'm going to rip you off. They have that kind of mindset. We call it the walking wallet syndrome. You find this in a lot of countries that are poor. When they see that you're foreign, they hear that you're speaking English, and especially if they see your passport or your name, you kind of have a target on your back for people wanting to kind of rip you off. Or for them just to assume that you're rich and to assume things that may or may not be true. I think there's comparative richness where the average American is certainly more well off than the average Cambodian, but a lot of the Americans in Cambodia are kind of like, what's a funny way to put this? Like sleaze bags. So, so, you know, a lot of people end up in Cambodia for long periods of time to, to kind of, mess around, to spend time on the beach. A lot of people don't go to invest money and to do business. A lot of people are trying to just kind of escape the Western society. And a lot of the people I met in Cambodia, like expats, I always call these people very lost. They're just, what have you been doing? Oh, I've been working in a bar in Phnom Penh for 5 years. And you're like, whoa, that's hardcore. You're like, yeah, I got a little hut. I married a Cambodian girl. You're like, oh, okay. It's like a whole different reality than I think what people assume. So I don't like the rich stereotype. I wouldn't consider myself a rich person. Of course, comparative to the average Kyrgyzstani person, I'm certainly rich. But I'm not rich by any means. You're just kind of, I don't know. It just kind of depends. That's a complicated one. But I understand why they think that, and I think since many people don't have the opportunity to actually interact with Americans in person, I think that's a fair stereotype to have. Just like all Chinese people are communists, or all I don't know, all Egyptian people are Muslim. If you don't meet the people, you don't have any nuance on your opinion, I think is the point. If you meet the people, you realize not all Chinese people are communist. China isn't even really that communist in general. Not all Egyptians are Muslim, and not all Americans are rich. It's just, you just got to get out there. You got to meet people. That's the whole point. So number 2, which is really funny, Americans are fat. This is a really common stereotype I get, that Americans eat huge portions, that Americans are all obese, that we drink soda. These people always talk about the big gulps. I don't know if you guys know that, but it's actually absurd. Having lived in Europe for a while, it's really absurd. It's like 42 fluid ounces of liquid, which is over, I think, about a liter soda that Americans drink, that it's just this kind of, I don't know how to explain it, this stupid redneck stereotype. So, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, you kind of have these prejudices and stereotypes that's the one, the stupid redneck American guy who's fat and doesn't know anything. It's a weird one that people have. I don't know where this caricature came from. I think it kind of is half by media, half by ridiculous news stuff that gets on the internet, half by, weird YouTube videos. I kind of understand where this comes from, but yeah, it's weird. So not all Americans are fat, but Americans are proportionally a lot fatter than Europeans. I will say that is 100% true. And Americans are way proportionally fatter than the average Asian. So take it as you will. Is it a bad stereotype? Yes. But is it unfair? I don't know. I'm not sure. I have to say I try to eat pretty healthy, but some people back in my home state certainly don't. So number 3 of the negatives would be that Americans are ignorant of the world. And this one has always been interesting to me because I always was curious where this came from. And I think it was kind of perpetrated originally by these viral YouTube videos that people watched where they asked Americans to, put like India on a map, and most Americans put it like where Australia is. And it's weird. Because the thing is, like, all the friends I have are not ignorant in the United States. I think there are some kind of ignorant people about the world in the US for sure. And there's a lot of dumb people in the United States, just like in most countries in the world. But yeah, this is a weird one. Everyone says like, oh, do you know where this is? Or most Americans don't know where this is. Or why are Americans so America-centric? Or la, la, la. And I'd like to explain my opinion on this because this is really interesting for me. So I understand why this misconception would happen. The secondary opinion here is that the United States of America is huge. It has 50 states. It has some provinces, or not provinces, but federal districts. It has territories, like Puerto Rico or Guam or the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the thing is, most Americans are working full time. Most Americans maybe aren't privileged enough to travel abroad because traveling from the United States to Europe or to Asia is actually quite expensive. And the United States is just huge. So if you don't live in a hub airport, like from Albuquerque, my hometown, I have to fly to Phoenix, to Salt Lake City, to Los Angeles, to Dallas, to Chicago, to go anywhere. And the thing is, my state is the size of Germany. The state next to me is the size of France. The state next to it, California, is the size of like all of Western Europe. So it's like, it's really hard for Americans to travel. Only something like less than 30% of Americans have passports. And I found that to be really strange. I didn't believe it. But in a sense, it made sense because flying is expensive, people are busy, and the United States is incredibly far away from everywhere else. A lot of Americans, of course, have been to Canada, have been to Mexico, maybe have been on a cruise to Jamaica, got some sun in the Cayman Islands. But unless you're really interested, I mean, it's like you can't just take a hop, skip, and a jump over to Istanbul. It's like a flight. And a lot of people, if your family is not a big traveling family, or maybe your family isn't that wealthy, you're just not going to make that trip. So, yeah, you just have to remember like Western Europe or Europe in general has like somewhere like 56, 58 countries or something like that. The United States has 50 states. So you meet many Americans traveling in the United States who they want to do all 50 states, or they want to see all the 50 states. They want to see all the Canadian provinces. And the thing is, like, that's a big endeavor. That's the same thing as a European going to every European country. And the distance for that travel is also huge. So I think it's fair to name some Americans as ignorant. I think that's fair. But I think it's unfair to hold the same expectation with a country that is absolutely massive and quite disconnected from, we can call it, the old world. And the thing is, like, yeah, should Americans know that Europe isn't a country and that Africa is a continent? Yeah, they should know that Europe is made of countries and is not a country, for sure. They should teach that in school. But until you go or you have any connection with it, there's no reason to know or also to care secondarily. And I think that's also the point. Most people around the world can consume some type of American media, whether it's songs, whether it's foods, whether it's news, it depends what it is. It's weird. I can travel anywhere in the world and I can sit in a bar and I can listen to American music and I can feel like I'm in New Mexico. But the thing is, like, if you don't know, there's no way anyone in the United States is going to know anything about Kyrgyzstan unless they come here or they meet someone from here, because you're not going to accidentally pop into a bar in the United States and it's a Kyrgyzstani bar with traditional Kyrgyzstani food and Kyrgyz music. It's just never going to happen. So I kind of understand the ignorance. I think sometimes it's willful ignorance, and it does bother me. I really don't like loud Americans that are really stupid when I go abroad, or really drunk. That's also another kind of stereotype. But the thing is, I see drunk, stupid tourists from all the countries. So I don't think that's necessarily an American thing. So I'm debunking that misconception. So I'm going to move on now to the positives, because it's interesting. These are things that you don't think about. And these aren't necessarily misconceptions, but some of these are. I guess it just depends. These are conceptions, preconceptions that people have about Americans. So in Asia, it's an interesting thing, especially living in Vietnam. People were incredibly friendly and nice to Americans, or just to foreigners in general. I was always walking around with French people in Vietnam, and the French and the Americans, they absolutely messed up Vietnam for a long time. And it's just like the, what do they call it? The, like thing one and thing two, like the terrible duo. I don't know what you call it, but yeah, if you go into a bar and you're like, I'm an American and I'm a French guy in Vietnam, the Vietnamese should be like, get out, but they're not. So it's funny because I had a student, she was Vietnamese, English, and if she was learning English. And I asked her about some sort of like, what do you think about Chinese people? What do you think about Americans? And it's interesting because her opinions of Chinese people were very strong, because Vietnamese people have been warring with the Chinese for a long time, and they have a lot of opinions about the Chinese. And so what she said was not very positive. But what she said about the Americans, because she's from South Vietnam, her father fought alongside the Americans in the Vietnam War. She said, Americans are strong and Americans are confident and smart. And that was not something that I was used to hearing, because especially in Europe, you don't really get that. You don't really get that notion. Europeans would never say that Americans are smarter than Europeans. It just wouldn't happen. And even in Mexico, I mean, there's a little like big brother, little brother thing between the United States and Mexico, and the Mexicans would never say the gringos are smarter or more confident than Mexicans. They might say they're richer, but not more industrious or anything. But she had a very positive outlook on the United States. And when I talked to people in Vietnam, this was like a very common theme. People thought, especially Americans, were strong. They were doing the right thing. They were for freedom. I think they believed in a lot of these values that the United States was founded on. But I don't know if we actually live up to it, or we really deserve the recognition like that. But I found that extremely interesting, because I just hadn't heard that opinion before. So the secondary part of this was I was studying business school in Europe, and it was interesting working in group projects, because it was a multidisciplinary master's program in business, and people from all over the world. And it was interesting because I never really realized that being an American, I had some sort of like advantage within school or within business. And it was an interesting comment from some of my colleagues, was that they wanted to work with me because Americans are good critical thinkers, and Americans are good business strategists, and Americans are good public speakers. Just obviously because the program was also in English, and my English is just better than an Italian guy who's not from the United States. It's just granted. So I found this genuinely interesting, because in Europe, the educational system is very, I don't know, curriculum based, and they don't have, it's a lot more like, here's the information and you need to memorize it and absorb it. This is changing slowly, but just the structure of the whole thing is different. In the United States, a lot of the curriculum, whether it's high school, but especially in university, it's all about I'm going to give you the kind of overview, and it's your job to kind of take this information and transform it into theory, or transform it into debate, or transform it into results. And Americans, as long as I can remember being an American growing up, I always did critical thinking exercises at school. I was part of a problem-solving team when I was a kid. And I think this is a part of American, this kind of think tank, work group, flat hierarchy. A lot of this came from the United States. So a lot of people liked to have me on their team because I thought about things differently than my European colleagues, because I don't think in some schools they were given the flexibility to experiment or to innovate as much as we are, especially in university in the United States. So I found that quite interesting, and it never really struck me until people said it. And since then, I've thought about it, and yeah, I think we do some things very right in the education system in the United States. I think we do some huge errors for sure, but in general, I really do think there's some positives to take away from our education system. And there are things that work abroad, there are things that work locally, and yeah, the grass is always greener. Sometimes you want to live in Europe, sometimes you want to live in the United States. There's pluses and minuses. It's interesting. So I think the negatives explain more of the common misconceptions that I've had abroad as being an American. And the positives are kind of these preconceptions or preconceived notions that you run into that you didn't necessarily expect. A funny part about being American abroad is people ask you questions that you don't really know how to answer. And the number one is, what is your favorite American food? And it's like, that's like a weird question, because like it really depends where you're from. And of course we eat burgers and we eat pizza, but like everyone around the world eats burgers and pizza. And burgers come from Europe and pizza comes from Italy. So it's like, is it really American? I mean, we have American. I mean, is there really an American food? Question for you guys. You can answer in the comments if you're still on the stream. Is there an American food? Is there something that is traditionally American that suffices that question? Because if I say meatloaf, I feel like they eat meatloaf in Germany. I've had it in Germany. It just has a different name. So if you guys have any idea about that, definitely let me know in the comments. There's some other funny questions you get as an American, but mostly I just get funny questions about New Mexico because that's the home of Breaking Bad, and that's kind of the only thing that people typically tend to know about regarding where I'm from. And a lot of people just think I'm from Mexico, and then I have to get in this whole like hullabaloo about trying to explain, ooh, po' boy sandwich. All right, Sam. Po' boy sandwich. That is very American, but it technically, you know what? I'm going to give that one to you. That's a kind of Cajun thing, and Cajun culture and American culture, one and the same, but also quite different. I'm going to think on that one. I'll get back to you. So that being said, guys, I think those are the common misconceptions that foreigners typically have about Americans. I just think it's these negative stereotypes that I think all people come in with, that all people come in with about any culture. But you just have to take all of people's judgments with a grain of sand, and remember that when you're abroad, it's your job to represent your country for the best and to do your best job to kind of, be a cheerleader for your country, I guess is my main point. Like, don't be the drunk guy who ruins something and breaks something and screams at people or is a dick. Don't be a dick when you're traveling. And the thing is, then we wouldn't have so many of these negative stereotypes. And just be open to learning and open to sharing about where you're from, and don't go into it with any type of sort of like nationalist complex or patriotic complex that the United States is the best country in the world and this is why. Each country has its own valid claim to being a great place, and I think this is what makes the world an awesome place to travel. So that being said, guys, the great Macedon, if you're still watching, you can send me a Macedonian shirt. I just got this one in Tirana. I felt like it was a good choice. And I think that's going to do it for today's podcast. We're going to do these once a week for you guys just tuning in now. Probably Thursdays. You can tune in like in the morning in the United States and in the afternoon / early evening in Europe. Yes, Josue, I did say that. You can see that earlier. But thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. And we're finishing up our Macedonian series. I have 3 more videos. I just released a video about Ohrid, which is this amazing, beautiful, high altitude lake in between Albania and Macedonia. Absolutely, absolutely beautiful place. You have to see it. I think the video does justice. I eat some tripe soup. So you should definitely check that one out as well. And thank you, Kaki Morito. Nice name. Thank you for watching. And we have 2 more videos left in in Macedonia, and then I'll get my Kyrgyzstan story out. So if you like the stream, make sure to let me know. I'm always taking ideas for the next podcast. I'll be doing one next Thursday. You can put your ideas here. You can put them in the comments underneath the video when it's released. You can also follow me on Instagram at _talesfromtheroad_. I often put posts regarding what content I create. So get ready to see some crazy food from Kyrgyzstan. And thank you guys for watching. Have a blessed day. See you all later. And Rahman from Kyrgyzstan.